New Mormon Truth. This video is an introduction video and also covers determining truth. The purpose of the videos is to find the truth. I plan to examine the truthfulness of the critical issues facing the LDS Church. And what are the critical issues? Well, Apostle M. Russell Ballard in 2016 said, "I'm talking about polygamy, seer stones, different accounts of the first vision, the process of translation of the Book of Mormon or the Book of Abraham, gender issues, race in the priesthood, or a heavenly mother." Just to point out, all my quotes or where I'm getting my information is listed in brackets with a endnote. I list all my sources at the end of the video, and in parentheses I list M. Russell Ballard as a prompt for me, but this way you know where the information is coming from. So those are the issues: polygamy, seer stones, first vision, and so on. Now, a lot of LDS members will think that people leave the church because they're sinning, want to sin, are weak, or have weak testimonies. But the fact is, Michael Ash, who is a prominent LDS apologist, stated, the top 3 issues that cause LDS members to leave the church. Number 1, these are not in order, some problem with the Book of Mormon. That's usually archaeology, DNA, or some anachronism with the Book of Mormon. Anachronism is just something that's out of place. If the Book of Mormon talked about the internet would be an anachronism because it's out of place. It wouldn't exist in the old world or even in the time of Joseph Smith. So some problem with the Book of Mormon, the Book of Abraham, and polygamy. Those are according to the LDS apologist, so it's not someone's weak faith. These are the top 3 issues, and as you can see, they're actually listed in M. Russell Ballard's quote. Now you'll see the background on a lot of my slides is this, and you're probably wondering, oh, what is that? It looks like a rock in the background, and I use this as a reminder of that we're discussing the truth claims. And this is actually a photograph from the LDS Church of what's known as the brown seer stone. So if you've ever heard the term seer stone, this is what they're actually referring to. So we'll be discussing this in future videos, but I use it as a background, just as a reminder that we are discussing and analyzing the critical issues. The goals of the videos. There are videos on YouTube from a person or a channel called LDS Truth Claims, and he says an honest seeker of truth ought to read the best scholarship both sides have to offer on any given issue. So we're going to look at the best scholarship. I'm going to present the critical or anti-Mormon. I use the term critical because anti-Mormon is a pejorative term, and the LDS apologetic. So just so you know, call someone an anti-Mormon, you wouldn't say LDS beliefs are anti-Catholic or anti-Jehovah Witness. It just is it's pejorative. So I'm going to use the terms critical and apologetic. And when I refer to that, I'm talking, if you want to translate as anti-Mormon, that's fine. So we're going to examine the evidence in context and evaluate the critical and the apologetic arguments. And I'm going to try to provide additional resources on both sides, so you can evaluate the claims yourself. And then in the end, you decide. It's up to you anyway. So, and then always remember Article of Faith number 11. that we claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience, and allow all men the same privilege, let them worship how, where, or what they may. A little background on myself. This is not me, but there's a video. This is actually from a video from YouTube that this couple has some beliefs. I believe they're praying to Heavenly Mother and wondering if that's okay, or within Orthodox Mormonism. I think there are quotes from general authorities that say no, but just use it as a background. But my background, I have LDS parents. I was born in the Covenant and raised LDS. I was baptized more than 40 years ago, so I've been a member for a while. I served a mission. I've taught youth and adult classes, mainly youth classes. I was in ward leadership, so I've attended ward council. And I read LDS apologetic material. So mainly in the 1990s, but I've read stuff by Bickmore, Hopkins, stuff from Farms, things like that. Even stuff from Margaret Barker, who's not LDS, but definitely since about 2005, people have been interested in her work because it correlates to LDS beliefs. And then a while ago, I had a faith crisis, and my story of my faith crisis is very typical. I encountered critical information on the internet. I went through an intense research phase. I studied for 6 months. Literally, you'll hear people that it becomes very obsessive. They think about it all day long. After they get home and have free time, they'll be up late reading early in the morning. That's pretty much how it is, and it can go on for months, a year, sometimes weeks, but it goes on for some time, and then usually you lose your testimony, or that's what happens. It seems to most people who have shared their story, and I lost my testimony. So currently, I'm a non-believer but open-minded, meaning I'm going through these videos, looking at the evidence again, and I'm willing to change my beliefs or thoughts on various issues. So I think that's very important. I think you'll find a lot of critics who are very closed-minded. They're not interested in hearing anything new or challenges their belief. And actually, we're going to be covering that, why that is, in a future video. But I am a non-believer, and it's just so you know, it's very important to know where you're, who you listen to, what you read, where their bias is. So if you you may listen or watch videos from believers, so you know that they're a believer, and or you may want to know if they don't believe. But I am currently not a believer. Fair use. I do this just because questions about using images and quotes has come up recently. So fair use is a doctrine that allows limited use of copyrighted materials without requiring permission from the right holders for, quote, criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. That is a direct quote from the copyright website. It provides for the legal, non-licensed citation or incorporation of copyrighted material in another author's work, like this video. My videos are non-profit. I'm not making any money, and they're educational. You can also say they're also criticism and comment. And I assert any copyrighted material according to the Copyright Act of 1976. Now let's move on to determining truth. Faith. From Hebrews 11:1, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So the Greek word for evidence means, one, a proof, that by which a thing is proved or tested, or two, conviction. It's translated evidence in the King James that you can see, and conviction in the American Standard Version, and those other two translations, the American or the New American Standard and the Revised Standard Version. The meaning is conviction through evidence. So therefore, faith is the conviction from evidence of things not seen. From the LDS Bible Dictionary, we have, all true faith must be based upon correct knowledge, or cannot produce the desired results. And a quote from Thomas Edison, not that he's a prophet, but I think he said it very well. For faith, as well-intentioned as it may be, must be built on facts, not fiction. Faith in fiction is a damnable false hope. Therefore, faith is conviction based on factual evidence or correct knowledge. So moving on, now this word epistemology, I could have just used determining truth and have that term there, epistemology. It just really means it's not what you believe, but it's how you believe. And believe it or not, the reason I cover this verse is this actually the most important, or one of the most important concepts to understand is, how do you determine the truth, or how do you determine what you believe? So how do we do that? It's the how. So how do we determine truth? One, it can be self-evident. So truths that require no proof. So the usual examples are math and logic, or logic you could just put basic reasoning. Now there are other self-evident things like Christians will consider the Bible to be self-evident truth. Between Muslims it would be the Quran. Among Mormons it would be the standard works. And in the Declaration of Independence it states that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the Declaration of Independence says that it has some self-evident truths in it. So now you maybe could debate those, but it's saying that they consider those to be self-evident. The next thing in the how is empirical evidence. What this means is evidence through the senses or objective experiments or tests. This is basically the scientific method. So the scientific method is you have some data that leads to a hypothesis. Technically, I think you're supposed to start with a hypothesis and generate some data, but a lot of times you already have some data that make up a hypothesis. Then once you have a hypothesis, you go through a cyclical cycle, or you repeat this cycle of you test the hypothesis by testing something that you can, through the senses and get objective data that leads to new data. Then what you do is you accept, refine, or reject your hypothesis. So that's the scientific method, is basically testing with theories, or theories and testing, and coming up with data, things like that. Now the next thing is religious experience. And is religious experience acceptable? Some accept it and some don't. If you don't know, this is the big debate when you get out there. This is what you're going to find critics and maybe LDS apologists discussing, is this whole thing. Is what I mean by that is religious experience. Everyone accepts the scientific method of reasoning or facts through that way, but the religious experience is one that's some people accept it and some don't. It's actually quite debated, so I'm going to spend just a tad of time going over it. Why you can see why some people accept it and why some people don't. Okay, the religious experience has two basic problems. If you don't know, the person that produces the LDS Truth Claims actually mentions these two problems in there and actually cites them. Error. Feelings and impressions are subjective. And there's a large amount of religious disagreement. What we mean by that is religions don't agree. So hopefully you know where I'm going with this, is that they don't agree with our religious experience and we don't agree with theirs. So what I mean by that, and getting a little bit more detailed, is through conditioning or confirmation bias, we can experience what we want to feel. So let's back up and maybe define some terms. Some people may call conditioning indoctrination, meaning if you're raised in a religion, doesn't matter what religion it is, Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, Muslim, you learn things from your parents, and you're actually taught over and over certain things. Like, in the LDS church, it could be what the Holy Spirit feels like. They'll say, "Oh, don't you feel the Spirit?" So you start to become, you're actually being taught how to respond to things or how to act. And then confirmation bias is basically we favor information that confirms our beliefs, and we ignore that information which doesn't. So once again, through conditioning, through basically upbringing and confirmation bias, or we tend to believe, or we tend to favor things that support our beliefs, we experience what we want to feel. Next, there's no objective test to tell the difference between a self-generated mental or emotional experience and a true spiritual one. There's no way to test it. In fact, I believe they have reproduced various religious experiences, or scientists can produce them in the laboratory through natural methods. So, going on, it's common for a person to hear voices, internal audible, or have hallucinations or visions from traumatic events such as bereavement, abuse, neglect, anxiety, etc. Or when, this is the important part, or when a spiritual or supernatural experience is expected. And I've tacked on this last sentence because I think it's one of the ones that some of us hold on to for our religious belief, or possibly. Hearing or seeing departed loved ones is common across faiths. It seems like we'll hear experiences of departed loved ones appearing, and we use it to justify our faith, our confirmation in our faith. But believe it or not, that's happening to people of other faiths. So it can't be a justification for our... Now, I'm not saying this is not just justification for belief, maybe of life after death. Where I'm really going at this is that your faith is correct. Just continuing the same, or confirmation bias and conditioning. This is really conditioning. Charismatic Christians speak in tongues during worship, while LDS members just feel the Spirit. In fact, possibly a charismatic Christian could find a Mormon service very boring because nothing's going on. Basically, what you have is conditioning. Each religion experiences the expected. So you have to ask yourself, when the charismatic Christian, as an LDS member, you have to ask yourself, when the charismatic Christian is going to church and talking in tongues, what's really going on. So, some Mormons or some LDS members may say, maybe the devil's deceiving them, but a naturalistic explanation is that this is just conditioning. They have been indoctrinated or brought up to, they see this growing up as children, and there's an expectation that they'll speak in tongues, and then maybe they try it out and something happens, and when something happens, maybe they use it as a confirmation bias. I highly recommend that you go to the additional resources and look and research this topic. It's quite fascinating. Next, people of all faiths, Catholics, Muslims, Hindus, Lutherans, Baptists, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, all have spiritual experiences and know their particular faith, including their leaders and religious books or book, are true. They can't all be right. So, and what I mean by that is we're going to have to assume that a lot of these beliefs are contradictory, and the contradictory beliefs are illogical. If that is true, then basically someone is wrong, or everybody is wrong. So as an LDS member, you have to ask yourself, what's going on? What are all these other religions are having religious beliefs? So what's going on? Are they all deceived by the devil, and only the LDS Church is right, or is there just what I've been talking about? Is there conditioning and confirmation bias going on, and other things if you research the topic? Conclusion? Basically what it is remember, we're back to the question of how do we determine truth, and we said, basically there's the self-evident things that are true, math and logic, things like that, and then also the empirical methods, meaning the scientific method, and then the religious experiences, questionable, meaning some accept it and some don't. Like the videos on the LDS Truth Matters, he accepts religious experience. As an LDS member, you are. So, but as when we're going to looking for evidence, can it be used for evidence? And here's my conclusion, is that religious experience is supernatural. So basically what you have is, well, if you take a step back, like the empirical things and the self-evident things, those are what we call maybe natural evidence. Okay, so religion is actually a supernatural evidence. So, and therefore there's no objective or no natural testing method. That's what I have to say. This is the problem. So, my bullets under there are, we can only test the natural elements of the supernatural experience. So if we have a supernatural experience or description of one, unfortunately we can only test the natural things. I mean, where I'm really going at this is that, God's, let's say as a LDS member, you're saying, well, I'm getting inspiration, but then you talk to some of your Christian friends and they'll say that God talks to them. So the question is, well, how do you test that? I mean, what do you really think you think God's talking to them? Then, that's great. What happens when it contradicts your beliefs? So this is where I'm going to, is that, well, how do we know that God really talked to them? So we can only test the natural. So we can only test the natural elements of a supernatural experience. Like maybe, I don't know, maybe your friend told you some event was going to occur next week. So we can only test to see if it happens or doesn't happen. But if you describe some supernatural thing in the supernatural event, we can't actually test that. So we can rather test the natural, or we can seek a naturalistic cause for the supernatural event. So, like I say, conditioning, confirmation, bias. So continuing from LDS Scripture, from the Doctrine and Covenants, it says, but behold, I, the Lord, say unto you, Oliver Cowdery, that you must study it out in your mind, and then ask me if it be right. And if it is right, I will cause your bosom shall burn within you, therefore you shall feel that it is right. Further, by Apostle Hugh B. Brown. Now, Hugh B. Brown was an apostle from 1958 to 1975. He died in 1975. And he was first counselor to David O. McKay from 1963 to 1970. And he wrote this. This was published in after his death, and I believe it said it was like his final farewell. So I believe it was written around 1970. But he said, "And while all members should respect, support, and heed the teachings of the authorities of the Church, no one should accept a statement and base his or her testimony upon it, no matter who makes it, until he or she has, under mature examination, found it to be true and worthwhile. Then one's logical deductions may be confirmed by the spirit of revelation to his or her spirit." So, well, here are the sources, but maybe just a conclusion, as to how do we determine truth. So, it's by the naturalistic methods, and any supernatural we have to test by the natural. So here are the sources. In future videos, when I get to the sources, I'm just going to pause 2 or 3 seconds on each slide, and you can pause the video. But there will be a link in the video that you can go to the sources and just click on the link so you don't have to research or type it in. So there you go. There are the sources.